Hello and welcome to this week's myNewsWrap, news from the world of SAP, Microsoft, and the world in between. And this week really has quite some news for you. So let's start with the SAP side of the house. First of all, I would like to highlight some kind of landing page curated overview of content called Udina Business Technology Platform by the Unior Cloud Services. I think that's an SAP partner, who gives you quite some overview about different topics on the business technology platform, like, of course, services and solutions that are provided by Udina, but also quite some information around development, starting from architecture on the different environments, SAP Fiori elements, programming models like CAP, RAP, BOPF, and quite some information also around the tooling that is available there. Really nice, open platform in order to get some information there. Really nice if you have some questions. I think that's a fair page to start. Then one blog post that I would like to highlight around developing and registering multi-tenant applications on SAP BTP, focusing on the Kyma runtime. So this blog post kind of guides you through all the prerequisites and all the single steps that you have to do in order to provide such a service, such a software as a service offering on the BTP, because it's not super straightforward, but I think that blog post is really helpful there. And then Dennis van Kempen is pushing out quite some blog posts over the recent weeks. And this week there are two more focusing on the BTP Kyma runtime in order to extending other SAP solutions. And this week he's covering SAP SuccessFactors as well as the S/4HANA cloud area. Now you might say, I would also like to have the S/4HANA on-prem world. Yes, currently Kyma and on-prem connectivity is a very special topic with respect to the cloud connectors. So wait for Kyma 2.0, which should come out soon, and then this topic is solved. Then from different areas of the SAP ecosystem, one news that I would like to highlight is around the SAP Cloud SDK, which has now a public beta for JavaScript 2.0, so for the next major release. This blog post guides you through what's in there, and there are some, I wouldn't call them breaking changes, but there are some changes that might need some attention. So if you're using the SAP Cloud SDK, if you're planning to move to the next major release, then take a look at the blog post and check that out. And then, another blog post that crossed my path this week, which is interesting to see, but also addresses the problems that developers have when entering the SAP ecosystem, called Learning Frustrations of an SAP Developer. I think a very fair blog post around that topic, very good read. And if you're reading that, also walk through the comments. They are also really interesting and give more insight, give more interaction on that topic. Unfortunately, no reply from the SAP side up to now, so no official reply from SAP Learning or something like that, which is a bit of a surprise. But perhaps next week somebody will pick that up. With that, let's switch to the Microsoft side of the house. Of course, starting with Azure Functions, and as now I would say a regular guest, a blog post by Marcel, who had 3 contributions last week. This time I have picked up one around uploading files to Azure Storage using Azure Functions, namely the PowerShell flavor. I think also a scenario that's super useful. And again, as with the other blog posts that I've presented from Marcel, super decent walkthrough in detail what you have to do in order to make this scenario reality. Then another really interesting GitHub repository presenting a scenario around object recognition using Azure Custom Function, Azure Custom Vision AI, and Azure Functions. So training on pictures using this Vision AI functionality or service, and then deploying the learned model or applying the learned model, that's the right phrase, to Azure Functions and making use of that. So the GitHub repo contains the code and also a very descriptive README. So if you are around that area, that's really interesting. And then if you are planning to migrate from Azure Functions v3 to v4, there is a new functionality that is presented by Anthony Chu in a short tweet in the Azure portal. So you can now open your app's diagnose and solve problems page and do a pre-upgrade validator. And this will tell you if there are any breaking changes within your app when you switch to the v4 version, and how to mitigate them or how to overcome them. So I think that's really cool. That will hopefully help the growth of Functions version 4. Then another episode of the Azure Fun Bites covering the topic of Azure Durable Functions for automation. So especially typical workflow scenarios that come along with Azure Durable Functions. If you're interested in that, I think that's well spent time to watch that episode. And then another very cool blog post that I liked a lot around moving Azure Functions from AKS to container apps. So as you might know, you can containerize Azure Functions, putting them into Docker container and deploying them wherever you can deploy Docker containers. And this blog post now guides you through how to move from AKS, how to move those deployed functions from AKS, so from Kubernetes, to container apps, leveraging some more comfort with this serverless offering. It's a super detailed walkthrough how they do that, and also highlighting what are the price that you pay when you move from AKS to the container app side. Now with that, perfect segue to the area of containers and Kubernetes. And there is one startup that I would like to highlight this week that was announced end of last year. And I've referenced the introduction blog post. And if you take a look at the names that are underneath there, namely Mark Fussell and Jaron Schneider, then you might know where this new startup Diagrid is coming from and where it's going to. They are the co-founders or co-inventors of Dapper, and they are also heavily involved within Kida. So this startup wants to help developers in making the life of developing microservices easier. And of course, then focusing on Dapper and Kida as some tools to do so. So if you're working with Dapper, if you're working with Kida, I think Diagrid is a startup to watch. I've also referenced the Twitter handle in order to follow news around that topic. Then Dapper is really getting more and more traction. There is a short YouTube video series on the DevOps labs around Dapper. I have referenced the 3 episodes. Unfortunately, they are not in a playlist within the show notes, introducing Dapper and highlighting some aspects on how to apply Dapper. Then, staying with Dapper, there is also a very nice blog post around Azure Container Apps and Dapper bindings by example, so guiding you through how to make use of Azure Container Apps and leveraging Dapper bindings, which are an optional part of the Azure Container Apps. So also very helpful. And also be aware that somewhere down in the comments of this blog post that I think that's still the case, that if you use the AZ command line tool, you have to install an extension in order to interact via this command line tool with container apps, because they are not yet part of the core CLI tools. Okay. Now with that, that's all from the area of containers for today. Let's switch to DevOps. First of all, more a methodology topic around inner sourcing and how to work with immutable commits in the area of inner sourcing and making your life and the life of all the other contributors in inner source more comfortable and more easy to live with. Very interesting blog post. Not a big thing, has been there since ages, but very important to see what are the consequences when you are using immutable commits and how that will make your life easier. Then, also from the area of DevOps by Barbara Forbes, a blog post about how to apply Azure tagging strategy. So how to apply Azure tags. Azure tags, I think, super useful concept, super powerful concept, and the flexible that can help you make your life of operating resources on Azure super much easier. However, you can enforce them via policies, for example, so that the resources can only be applied if there are certain tags there. Now, there are resources when you cannot apply tags, and this might be an issue. So to overcome that, this blog post kind of guides you through how to integrate this tagging into your CI/CD pipeline, making use of Bicep. Super decent walkthrough, so definitely worth reading. And then GitHub has pushed out some news this week, which are super helpful for organizations. So you can now view the code scanning alerts across an organization. So there is one new tab now that is available for organization owners and team members with a specific role in order to see all the code scanning alerts across your complete organization. Then audit log streaming is now GA. So you can now stream your GitHub audit logs via the audit log tab to different endpoints like Amazon S3 buckets, Azure Blob Storage, Splunk, whatsoever. So that's also really a cool addition. And there is the option now to share GitHub actions within your enterprise. So you can share GitHub actions within the same organization or across organizations. And this way really make GitHub actions super reusable within your organization and improving your all over CI/CD workflow a lot. So also a very, very nice addition to the area of GitHub actions. And looking forward to using that hopefully someday. Then one blog post also from the Microsoft area around the topic of open source. So open source is, well, getting more and more attention at the moment, I think due to the Log4j topic and more attention in the sense that there is some discussion around that. What does open source mean? What does this and that open source license mean in detail, and what are the consequences out of that? And this is now, again, a blog post by Microsoft around what does this open in open source really mean to you. Very interesting read. Of course, also picking up the topic of .NET in Microsoft's open source commitment. Now with that, let's switch to the world in between SAP and Microsoft. And there is one blog post, this time on the SAP community by Bartosz Jakowski. Hopefully it will stay there. In his Your SAP on Azure blog post series, it's part 27 in the meantime. And this time it's about combining data which is located within SAP and learning from the data by application of Azure Machine Learning. So it's more a bit about, let's say, data science to get insights into this plenty of data that you have within your SAP system. And this blog post guides you through how to fetch the data from your SAP system and then how to apply machine learning algorithms. Also giving you a short introduction about the machine learning that is available on Azure. And then, of course, as every Saturday, a new edition of the SAP on Azure podcast. This time again, point of gravity more around infrastructure, but I think really interesting on quality checks that you can do if you deploy your SAP systems onto Azure. It's called Quality Check version 2. And it's a PowerShell script that simply checks a lot of different aspects on the more infrastructure and configuration level, like operating system, like Azure resources, VMs. It also checks SAP HANA and the setup there, and tons of other things. So if you are in that area, I think that one is worth taking a closer look. Yeah, and with that, let's switch to learning and events. There is one blog post from the README project of GitHub focusing on which contributions fit to your project and when to say no to contributions, because they would not bring your project forward. They would not comply to where your project is heading. And that's hard, but sometimes you have to say no. And this blog post shows you or describes what are the best ways in order to make the decision, when do I say no. Then one free offering that I would like to highlight by Microsoft in the .NET area, namely a free ebook around .NET microservices and the architecture for containerized .NET applications. It's free to download, of course, focusing purely on .NET, but especially when thinking about the Azure Container apps and so on, I think very valuable contribution there. Then in the area of events, I also have some things there. First of all, next week, there will be the IT Online Conference, which is hosted by the IT Online Magazine by Helge Sanden. It's a lot of topics around SAP, focusing on S4HANA, focusing on Rise with SAP, given by a lot of partners, SAP partners. And yeah, I think that's super valuable. The registration is a bit, I wouldn't say weird, but it's a kind of special thingy, because you have to register for the talks on the pages of the different contributors. So if you think you want to watch a talk from QBeyond, then you have to register at the QBeyond site in order to get access to that one. The IT Online Conference is just a bracket, and Helge Sanden, who is the chief of IT Online Magazine, does the moderation. However, content-wise, I think super valuable. And then another upcoming event, a bit more in the future, but not too far away. It's on the 2nd of February by the Cloud Native Meetup Rosenheim around Kubernetes 1.23 and what's new with that one. Looking forward to that. I think that will be a really interesting one. And then if you're working with Cosmos DB, I think there is now a second edition of the Azure Cosmos DB conference that had its first edition last year. It will be a second edition this year at the end of April, and they are calling for papers now, and that's open until the 10th of March. So if you have something there, go ahead and submit it. Now with that, I'm already at the last section for today, namely developer productivity experience. And there are some things, very different topics. First one that crossed my path was highlighted by Erhard Wolf. I never thought about that, but that's really important for quite some of us. Office has a built-in clipboard history for Windows. So copy pasting passwords from your password manager will have that in their clipboard, that they are stored in the history of the clipboard. So it makes sense, which comes at a price, to deactivate that. And it's not straightforward to deactivate that. So I have referenced the tweet of Eberhard, but also the Microsoft support article that will not in a second give you the idea what's meant behind that, but it shows you how to switch those things off. Then another tool that I would like to highlight, not super new, but super helpful. If you're working with Kubernetes, if you have tons of config files to clusters that might not even exist any longer, there is a little plugin called Config Cleanup that will help you with cleaning up your configurations that you have stored on your machine. So I think that's really, really helpful. Then if you are on Windows, if you would like to use WSL2 and focus your development around Linux and run Linux code on Windows, there is a great video around how to run Linux code on Windows with covering all the different topics in a super short time. So it's just 15 minutes, but it really guides you through on how to install WSL2, how to run Ubuntu, how to access files from Linux on Linux from Windows and vice versa, how to use Visual Studio Code, and so on and so forth. So that's really super interesting. And if you want to dig deeper into that, I think that's a perfect starting point. And then last but not least for this week, if you're using Edge, Microsoft Edge, and if you're using progressive web apps, so for example, I personally do not install Outlook anymore somewhere. I just use the progressive web app in order to access Outlook. And there is an addition with Microsoft Edge 96, which is the support for protocol handlers. So you can now explicitly define protocols that you would like to connect to those progressive web apps. That's really cool. And I think that will even give a bigger boost to using progressive web apps with Microsoft Edge. Okay, yeah, so with that, I'm at the end of this week's myNewsWrap. I hope I had some interesting news for you, some stuff to catch up with. And yeah, with that, I wish you a great Saturday, a very nice and very good Sunday, and a successful next week. See you again next Saturday. Until then, bye.